Thank you, Debbie. Billy Joel would like to let you know that he loves you just the way you are. What a powerful idea that we could be loved just the way we are, flawed, beautiful, in need of some work, and yet that love can still exist. This is really loud. Am I in both? No? Okay. We're going to do something a little different for our opening today. I came across this video this week and was just enamored by it. It's beautiful. It's a large wave cresting and touching up against some clouds. And it's just beautiful. And instead of words this morning, images. The American poet Elder Olson wrote, "Nothing is lost. Be still. The universe is honest. Time, like the sea, gives back in the end, but only in its own way, in its own conditions. Empires as grains of sand, forests as coal, mountains as pebbles. Yet be still, I say, be still. You were never the water, only a wave, not a substance, but a form substance assumed." We welcome you here this morning to do the work of community, to not just watch pictures of images of waves, but to understand that we come here to remember to love and to have the chance and experience to love. And so I don't know where you are on this day. Maybe you're excited about eating food this afternoon and watching a Super Bowl and perhaps a Bengals victory. That's an editorial. Maybe you're excited about Valentine's Day tomorrow. Maybe you don't care about Valentine's Day tomorrow. Either way, you are welcome here. It does seem that things are shifting ever so slightly in our world of Omicron, and we hope that continues to go in the right way. Maybe you're thinking of your grandparents. Maybe you're thinking of your grandkids. Maybe you're grieving or struggling today. Maybe you're happy as peaches. The happy peaches, not the grumpy peaches. Or maybe, like me, you're tremendously excited that the first images from the James Webb Telescope came back, and they've still got to put them all together, but it was 16 images of one star, and now they've got to align them all. So there are, we would think and hope, mind-blowing things to come from the James Webb Telescope that will move our souls and remind us of this beautiful cosmos we are a part of. Well, Billy Joel told us that he's going to love us just the way we are, and our service is about love today, as we think about widening the circle and how love is expansive. Eric is going to stay on that theme by playing Always from Irving Berlin.
Wrong and all day long I'd feel so blue. For the longest while I'd forget to smile. Then I met you. Now that my blue days have passed, now I've found you at last. I'll be loving you always, with a love that's true always. When the things you've planned need a helping hand, I will understand always, always. Days may not be fair always, that's when I'll be there always. Not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always. Dreams will all come true, growing old with you, and time will fly, making each day more than the day before, as spring rolls by. Then when the springtime is gone, then will my love linger on. I'll be loving you always, with a love that's true always. When the things you've planned need a helping hand, I will understand always, always. Days may not be fair always, that's when I'll be there always. Not for just an hour, not for just a day, not for just a year, but always.
Our chalice reading today is by Paul Sprecher. We light this chalice to kindle the fire of commitment, to spread our beloved faith, proclaim the good news that all are worthy and all are welcome, that God is love and none shall be left behind. May we carry this flame to all we encounter, letting our lives shine with its glow.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, bring, set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Good morning. My name is Amy Brock,
My name is Amy Brock, and I'm the Director of Religious Exploration for Children.
This month, we're exploring
This
widening
month, we're
the
exploring
circle.
widening the
Today,
circle.
in our RE
And
space,
today, in
we'll be
our RE
exploring
space,
love.
we'll be exploring love.
So this morning, I invite you to
This morning,
close
I
your
invite you
eyes
to
for a
close
moment,
your
or
eyes
find
for
a space
moment,
near you,
or
to
find a
stare
space near
at.
you to stare at.
And in that space,
And
I invite
in
you
that
to
space,
imagine,
I invite you to imagine
or remember what it feels like to
what
be
it
loved.
feels like to be loved.
Does it feel
Does
warm
it feel
or cool?
warm or
Does it
cool?
feel fuzzy?
Does it feel
Does
fuzzy?
it feel prickly?
Does it feel prickly?
What color do you
What
imagine
color
love
do
might
you
be?
imagine love might be?
These are the things that let
These
us
are the
know
things
that
that
we're
let us
experiencing
know
love.
that we're experiencing
And
love.
how others experience
And how
love
others
might be
experience
different
love
from how
might
we
be
experience
different
it
from how
ourselves.
we experience it ourselves.
Think about some of your
Think
favorite
about
ways
some
to
of your
experience
favorite
love.
ways to experience love.
Maybe you feel love when
Maybe
you
you
eat
feel
yummy
love
food
when you
with
eat
those that
yummy
you love.
food with those that you love.
Maybe you feel love
Maybe
from
you feel love from hugs or high fives. Maybe you feel love when someone gives you something that you need, or you give someone else something that they need. Maybe you feel love when people remember important things about you. Maybe you feel love when you do a favorite activity. Maybe you feel love when you work with others for justice, or they work to help you find justice. There are so many ways that we might feel or experience love. Now I invite you to think about what it feels like to be unloved. Does it feel warm or cool? Does it feel fuzzy or prickly? What color might you say unlove would be? When we experience these things that we know aren't love, we know. We may not have other names for it yet, but we know that it doesn't feel good. It is easy to identify that it's not loving when we feel that way about an experience. I won't ask you to imagine your favorite ways to experience unlove, because I don't really think that's a thing. If your eyes are still closed, you can open them now, because I'd like to tell you about a minister who kind of felt the same way about love. His name is Carlton Pearson, and he studied for many years about God and became really famous for advising people like presidents in God's ways. But the more he learned about what the stories say about God and how God is loving, the less he felt good about saying God was anything but loving. Stories like the one about Zacchaeus. Maybe you've heard that one before. Zacchaeus was a small man, and one day he climbed up in a sycamore tree so that he could see better, because he heard that Teacher Jesus was coming. And there were so many people in the crowd that had come to see Teacher Jesus that he couldn't see. Zacchaeus collected people's taxes, and he wasn't always truthful about how much they owed. He wanted to keep some for himself. And he didn't need the money. He was already rich. He just wanted to become richer. But like most people, even though his actions weren't showing it, he actually really wanted to be a good and loving person. And that's why he was so excited that Teacher Jesus was coming. He wanted Teacher Jesus to like him. And as Teacher Jesus came by, out of all the people in the crowd, he looked up at Zacchaeus and he said, "Hey, get out of that tree. I'm coming to your house today." And Zacchaeus was so surprised and so happy in that moment. He felt loved that Jesus had chosen him. And from that place of love, Jesus was able to teach him and help him learn to be a more loving person. Some people believe that when people make mistakes or purposefully do unkind things, that God will send them away forever. But people like Carlton Pearson and Teacher Jesus and many UUs don't seem to believe that. Because why would it be loving to teach people to be loving by being unloving to them? By not giving them opportunities to learn and to practice different ways of being in the world? Our first principle says that we all have inherent worth and dignity, and that means that we all have the ability to learn. And we learn best through example, through watching and experiencing life with others, sometimes again and again and again. And I like to think that the poet Maya Angelou was right. When we know better, we can do better. And so ends our time together today.
Of our children's covenant, which is in your skyline. In this place, I am kind. In this place, I am loving. As a friend to the earth and all animals and people. In this place, I am kind. This all has been happening for a while in this congregation. We have a rich history of being a fellowship, of calling ministers, and it also happens because of the support and generosity of the fellowship members. With that spirit this morning, we take our morning offering before we will have our kids process to their RE classes. So I'm going to ask you to do something very, very hard. It's been 2 years nearly since we changed the way we do things. And we're so excited that our kids can go back into their religious exploration classes. And we're still not singing them out, but Eric is going to play the song. And this is the hard part. We're going to ask you not to sing yet. Now we're getting there. We're getting there. The COVID task force met just this last week. Oh, you're singing. Yes. Eric will do the singing for you, and you can just enjoy it. So this part 2, also hard. We're going to invite you to make a pseudo bridge, a pseudo arch. If you want to stand up and kind of point at the other side as our children recess, feel free to do that, but we're still trying to keep some distance right now. So this is going to be the hardest thing you've done in a long time, but I think you can do it. I hear some mumbling on Spirit of Life. We're going to let that slide. But we're going to try and keep it to 1. And like I said, in the future, we'll be singing with masks, we hope sooner rather than later.
As you go, may joy surround you. As you go, go in peace. Know our love is with you always as you go, as you go.
Yay! Fantastic. Well, my joy is that this morning. We also share our joys and sorrows with each other through this form. These are located on the kiosk and on a music stand up front if there's a joy or a sorrow in your life that you'd like to share with our wider congregation. And if you'd like to light a candle instead, or in addition to writing one down that will be read aloud, please feel free to do that during our sharing time. So Flora J. Patrick says, thank you to my amazing husband, Chris, for the beautiful flowers and the yummy Sherry's berries waiting for me Friday after work. Chris, you're making us look bad, man. Like a Friday? Valentine's Day is tomorrow. All right, let that be a reminder for anyone. Expectations have been set. Bob and Wendy share a joy that our son Chris in Portland has found a good job after a year and a half of recovery from an industrial accident. Fantastic. Ben Morgan shares that he had a great hike Thursday with the UU hikers. And Melissa Adams shares that my mom and sister just moved across the country to Florida. I am sad and happy about this. My youngest daughter is having some health issues and she's struggling with, and again, it's it's a sorrow and a potential future joy. So, well, I've got one more sorrow to share this week. I'm wearing purple for a reason. The Reverend Jane Pupke served as the senior minister of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Richmond since 2006. But she served this congregation as the first minister to serve this fellowship. She came from Portland, and she served, as she called it, as Verlene reminded me, church in a box, because she would throw it all in her trunk and arrive, and she was foundational in helping this congregation find our way to what we are now. She died this past week from a traumatic and severe spinal injury, and she was only 66. The church, this one, grew 57% during her 2 years here. Her legacy can still be felt. She once said, to be the best person one could be spiritually and morally, to serve the good. That was an ideal I felt was worth living for, and I still do. And if your life met with Jane's life at any time, you know that she lived that life and those ideals. I met Jane in a class at Meadville Lombard, and I was so fortunate to meet this person who shaped this congregation. It was a music class, and she was a hoot. She was hilarious and did not suffer any fools. She was a powerful, powerful person. She also ran for the UUA presidency, the Unitarian Universalist Association. During that year, I reservedly walked up to her, not sure she'd remember me from our class at Meadville, but I had become the minister here and I wanted to share the path of the fellowship. And she knew exactly who I was and knew exactly what was going on in this fellowship because she never stopped caring and never stopped paying attention. She did a lot, which is no surprise. Her ideals were lofty. She'll have a celebration of life this coming Saturday, February 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time at the First Unitarian Universalist congregation in Richmond. But that will also be live streamed. So if anyone wanted to attend that, we'll put that information. It would be 11 o'clock here on our coast. And we'll put that in our all-congregational email. Shannon was kind enough to put some cards in the fellowship hall on the back table. If you'd like to sign a card to send to that congregation and to those who knew and loved and worked with her most currently, please feel free to do that after service. But I knew her in passing, and I just wanted to grab a story or three from those of you who knew her better, who shared ministry and life, and who can speak to the ways in which she shaped this congregation. If you didn't know her, and you think these are just some random stories about a person that your life did not meet with, you can hear these as stories of this faith community, our history, who we were, and how we became what we are today.
I'm Berlene Arnold. The flowers this morning are my offering in love and appreciation for Reverend Jean. She was a force. She started our choir indirectly by urging me to start one. And we had, I think, 5 or 6 people at that first meeting at the old community building. Some of you will remember that. I know there's some here sitting out there today that were part of that very first group. And from there we grew. Back in the olden days, when the visiting ministers would come, they often had homestays with one of the congregants. And Reverend Jean came to our house one weekend. And my husband and I had just gotten a Bernese Mountain Dog puppy. And the cat that resided at our house did not like that puppy. And she took to the garage on a shelf, and Jean felt such sorrow for that poor cat that she immediately founded another home and took the kitty back to Portland with her. So I have many fond memories of her.
Thanks, Verlene. Shannon's got a pretty story in the back.
I'll remember Jean most for ministering me when I called on her when I was having, I was very sad about the situation with my marriage. And I said, well, everybody in church, they all look so loving, all these loving couples. And she said, Shannon, those aren't their first marriages. I mean, it was so homey. I mean, she was capable of so much spirituality and could quote so many of the greats. But that piece of just practical truth, I stayed married.
Grace, can you come up to the front too, just so our Zoom folks can see you while you're talking? No, if you want. Just go up front a little bit so our Zoom folks can see you as well.
Sure, why not? Oh, gosh.
Well, I had the great good fortune of knowing Reverend Pupke also, and I served on the board at that time, and Verlene's husband, Frank Arnold, was the president, and as was Don Hartsaw at in an earlier iteration. But anyway, we were at a board meeting one evening, and there was a movie that had just come out, and I know you'll all remember it. This was a few years ago, but I think it was called Lookout Mountain. It involved 2 young men. Brokeback Mountain, yes. The music is fabulous. But anyway, at the board meeting, Reverend Jean said, so how many of you have seen Brokeback Mountain? I dare you to go see it.
Maybe just 1 or 2 more. Yeah, Wendy?
My connection with Jean was very personal in the sense that she came to our home and offered me spiritual direction. So in addition to helping our congregation, she was able to, and I actually think that probably was the beginning of why I'm on the pastoral care team now.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, this is how love spreads, folks, isn't it? All these years later, we're still remembering the love that this one person arrived with and shared with the people here in this community, in this fellowship. This is how the circle widens. This is how love is generative and creative and keeps growing and is real in our lives, is very real in how we experience the world around us. Let's just take a deep breath to calm our bodies, to find our center, to simply breathe, to do that thing which keeps us alive, here, experiencing love, offering love. For these words for a spoken meditation by Carrie Gottfried called Love Loudly. We'll follow that with a silent meditation. Love loudly, Spirit of life, of light, of all that is good and bad and in between. Give me the courage and inspiration to love loudly, to share my joy and compassion with others, to let them know how much I appreciate them. We all give and receive love, but loving loudly is one of the greatest gifts of all, and it's so simple. All it requires is one person who's willing to say to anyone and to everyone, you are loved. You are worthy of love. You deserve to be loved. Spirit of life, help me spread love throughout my communities. Help me teach others to love loudly so that it begins to circle around so I can hear it too. Sometimes the blurb for a sermon takes about as long to write as the sermon itself. The blurb, that little, 3-sentence pitch that's in the all-congregational email, and it's on our website and shows up in our newspaper. When I wrote the blurb for this week, I was writing it and I said, hell doesn't exist. And I finished the blurb and I stared at those words and I wondered, who am I to make such a profound statement? Much less, I got an email from a congregant midweek who said, your blurb got me thinking about whether hell exists or not, and then whether heaven exists or not, and then whether God exists or not. And I thought to myself, this sermon just got a lot more complicated, didn't it? Well, we all have different ideas of this as Unitarian Universalists. We're all kind of called to understand our own understandings of the afterlife and meaning-making here in our present, and what God means to us, if anything. Some might understand God as an active force. Some might not believe in God at all. Some might see God as love realized in our world. We welcome all those understandings here. But luckily for me, since I was intimidated to be the one stating such an audacious thing that hell doesn't exist, I found that you can find other smart people to do it for you, and it might hold more weight. So, I was thinking about our Universalist ancestors, Unitarians and Universalists. The Universalists were our religious ancestors who believed in love, and they did not believe in hell. And in fact, they were on a crusade against hell and that kind of thinking. One of the earliest religious ancestors on our Universalist side, or at least that theology, was Origen of Alexandria in the 3rd century. So it's not a new idea, though it might be radical. But it really took hold in the 19th century. For those Universalists, the force of love was the most powerful force in all the world, in all the universe. For them, they understood that God is love, and all souls are ultimately restored to holiness and happiness with God. And as such, a God of love could never create an eternal hell for God's creatures. They believed that the circle widens, and that love is what pushes the edges of that circle out. They also said that hell isn't even scripturally and biblically sound. They were Bible-reading Christians at the time, and they knew how to read their Bibles. They said it's based on shaky foundations at best, and that there are plenty of scriptures that directly refute it. Hosea Ballou, known as the father of Universalism, for instance, questioned how people could ever find pleasure at the idea of suffering of other in the afterlife, when such a prospect would appall us here in this life on earth. You can still hear preaching like this, though, about hell being real. You don't have to go too far or flip around on your TV to find an evangelist who's more than willing to share with you that your eternal soul will be damned to hell forever unless you happen to follow exactly what they believe. Convenient. This idea that my joy might be increased by understanding your sorrow, or at least not being a part of it. This is something we experience. Rob Bell, when he wrote his book about universalism, he was a preacher who did not believe in universalism and did believe in hell, until one day he realized that's not the God that he understood. And so he radically wrote a book called Love Wins. And he was immediately banished by his fellow fundamentalists. Now, when he wrote that book those years ago, those of us on the other side were saying, yes, universalism, that's exactly right. Welcome to the party. Welcome to the love club, where we believe that God is open to loving more. But one thing I've noticed is that we're not completely free of this thinking of somebody else's sorrow maybe giving us a flash of joy. I've seen this uncomfortably with COVID, as people might callously refer to someone dying who didn't follow their path through COVID with some kind of sense of callousness, or maybe even glee. David Rankin, who's a UU minister, once commented, "I was never assigned to hell until I moved to Western Michigan. I have since been told by clerks, colleagues, waitresses, shoe salesmen, and numerous high school fanatics that it is a virtual certainty. All my children have also been informed, so we'll be traveling as a family, and perhaps that means the rates will be reduced." Universalist ministers have long had some humor to approaching how they are going to try and dismantle the idea of hell. When John Murray was preaching in Boston, a rock crashed through his window, right into the middle of their church service. and it sailed close to his head. And so he picked up the rock and said, "This argument may be substantive and weighty, but this argument is not convincing." A rock through a window, not the love that John Murray was preaching on that day. But in truth, I don't think that hell is a laughing matter. I think it can be an abuse of the human spirit, a means of controlling and demeaning people. It can lead people to leading lives of fear and self-loathing, or anxiety and uncertainty, distorted by this constant fear of punitive and unforgiving attitudes. Hell feels in part like a spiritual disease that can spread. And so, for me, it's important to not underestimate the insidious nature of the whole way that hell normalizes judgment and condemnation and damnation, in the ways that we see these replicated in our culture. Guilt and shame come on board as well. I know that when I was struggling with the concept of whether hell existed or not, at first it was an easy question, because I just assumed I was going to heaven, so I didn't have to worry about if hell exists or not. But as I drifted in my theology further from those Christian roots, the question of does hell exist took on a little more impact in my life, because I wanted to be sure. And it was long after I intellectually said I don't believe that hell exists, that my body caught up, that I realized there was something in me that was still deeply scared of being wrong, that this myth I'd been told as a child would end up being correct, and I would have just made the wrong call. When Elizabeth Kubler-Ross studied her dying patients in her wonderful project, she found out so many fascinating things about the ways that humans engage this process of death. But one of the saddest things she reported was that among people of faith, it was only the people who deeply believed in hell that had a hard time and were incredibly troubled of accepting their own mortality. They suffered. They suffered the torments of hell here, even while they lived. I don't think fear is always a bad thing, necessarily. Fear can be a valuable warning. It can be a healthy reaction to danger. And so a proper, good, healthy fear can be okay. And even guilt, I'm not opposed to guilt out of hand. It can be a beneficial emotion, telling us what we have failed to live up to in our lives to be our better selves, that we might have hurt somebody else and that we have work to do. It's our conscience calling us back to love. And I'm not even opposed to parental authority and social restraints or religious structures. I like religious structures. I think it's a good thing we get together and talk about how we should live our lives. I appreciate the promises and the covenants and the agreements that we make to one another. And I think we should be accountable to them. Rules are necessary for maintaining a collective group as the way we hope it to be. But what I am opposed to is the way that hell diminishes other people, the way it relieves people from responsibility for their bigotries or their cruelties or their meanness or their callousness. If you're convinced that everyone different from you believes or is going to hell, it's not too far off that on some level that you consider them as less than you, or maybe even less than human. We've seen this happen time and time again, that a religious faith has been co-opted by hate, used to persecute Jews and indigenous people and Asians and gay and homosexual people and transgender people and Asians and Muslims and pagans and the earth itself. Hosea Ballou again didn't always preach at that church. He was an itinerant preacher for a while before that. And once in a debate with a Baptist minister, the Baptist said, "Brother Ballou, if I were a Universalist and I feared not the fires of hell, what is to prevent me from striking you on the head, stealing your horse, your saddle, and your money, and riding away without a worry for my soul?" To which Ballou replied, "Is that what you want to do?" Well, if you were a Universalist, the idea would never occur to you to do such a thing. Okay, that's tooting our own horn a little bit there, but we'll allow it. This idea that we would be loving and just and moral just because we're afraid of some punishment cheapens what love is, cheapens how love works. Doing good because doing good is more creative, it's more life-affirming, it's more generative. That's why we love, because we see it work in the world. We see its effects. We seek justice because when justice increases, we see love increase and the world's joys increase. We choose love because we believe it's simply more valuable than fear. It's more reliable than fear. It will show up for us if we invite it. It's fatal to love a God who does not love you, writes Alice Walker. All people deserve to worship a God who also worships them. Now, this might sound like blasphemy to some, but this is a good old voicing of universalism, proclaiming that God is love and that we are all lovable. It's our responsibility as religious people, I see it, to speak out against hell whenever we meet it. When others want to use a religion for cruelty or for hatred, then we can stand up as liberal religious people with our message of love to drown that out. In the words of John Murray, preaching when rocks were not being thrown at him, he said, "To bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of people, give them not hell, but hope and courage." And it does take hope and courage sometimes to live out our religious values, to find the places that love exists in our life. This past week was the anniversary of my dad's death 4 years ago. I was in the first year of my ministry here, and it still hurts, and it was a difficult week. But I thought a lot about my dad these 4 years later in this past week. When he was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, he tried for a year to beat it, doing chemotherapy and other more radical treatments. And then that didn't work, and he returned to Lexington to live with my brother. I believe my dad had a pretty hard life in some regards, a rough childhood, and he moved around a lot. After he and my mother got divorced, he was caught in an unhealthy relationship that would last near to the end of his life. My dad was kind to near all people that he encountered, but you sometimes got the sense that that kindness was attached to something else around self-serving motives. He made a lot of mistakes, and he carried them with him in those later years, to be sure. He had a lot of shame after he began thinking about what his life had been. And knowing that he was going to die, he was scared of hell, scared of it. He'd been raised as a Methodist. My brothers and I thought this would all end in the same way, that my dad was going to have this kind of Greek tragedy into his life. But the most amazing thing happened. For that last year of his life, he got off all the medication and started feeling more like himself again. He lived with my brother in my brother's home in Lexington, and he joined my brother's small, welcoming Methodist church. Everyone knew he would probably not last another year of his life. What an interesting dynamic to enter into a congregation knowing, being open to, being awkward with, but yet doing it anyway. And so he got involved in that little church. He went to a study group. He went to a greeter. And I should say that my dad was not a church-going person throughout his entire life. Certainly after us kids grew up, his church attendance dropped to, well, it just dropped all the way down. So for him to go back to a Methodist church after so many years was not easy for him. But he found that he loved it. And it was difficult. And his heart changed. People loved the Sundays that he was a greeter. He spent most of his life, concerned about number one and having a low trust level for other people. And he puzzled that all these people, they're all being so nice to him. Why were they being so nice to him? What were they going to get out of it? What do they want? But as he was loved, he became more open and more loving. That's how it works, people. He grew as a person, even at his age of 78, more joyous even in the face of certain death, more generous. He stopped worrying about hell quite as much, is the beautiful part of this story. Once he experienced that expansive love of God being love and real in his life, his concerns about hell drifted away. When he did die, the pews were full, not the way we thought my dad's funeral would go. The people came from all over to honor him, to say they appreciated knowing him for that year, and to show his family that they loved him. So back to what I can say I know about heaven and hell and God. I'll give it a stab. I think that God is love is a fantastic idea. It's beautiful, and it serves me and my understanding well. In heaven, I don't know about heaven, but I can make some claims on what I feel like heaven feels like here on earth, what it might be. That growth in our lives leads to beauty and fulfillment. That those are hard, that the harder, uncomfortable places, that they are pathways to deeper life experiences. That heaven on earth doesn't look like idle pleasures and getting everything you want, but it means doing good work and finding connection with other people in ways that you can be love, loving freely, helping people, and being helped in return. Reaching out and recommitting to your best self, the one that love leads you towards. Even in the last year of your life, that kind of growth and change is possible. And the thing is, most of us don't know when the last year of our life is going to be, no matter what our age. And so today is a really good day to commit to our authentic selves and try to taste a little bit of that heaven on earth by being curious and fascinated that this life even exists at all, that we are a wave and not the ocean, and how grateful we can feel for that. I'm not worried about hell either in the end. I'm way more interested about the here and the now. So let us invite love into our hearts and share it as widely as we can, and to love loudly, and invite any who are willing to unburden themselves with that idea of hell and condemnation and punishment. But a better way to be is free to celebrate the gift of life, free to share the gift of life with others, and free to make our world better in the ways that we each uniquely can. That is a freedom that sounds like heaven on earth. May it be so.